What I'm about to share with you is taken from personal experiences in Southern California, and it has happened to me twice this year. So I think it's important for people to know their rights and to defend themselves. Enjoy the show.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've got this stack of sources here, all focusing on something seemingly simple.
That little card, right? The Social Security card.
Yeah, and specifically the number on it, the SSN. It's something we all have. But, when do you actually need to share it?
And maybe more importantly, when should you definitely not share it? Especially like when you're looking for a job.
Exactly. So this deep dive, it's really into something critical, but honestly, pretty confusing sometimes.
Understanding that line, legitimate requests for your SSN versus, requests that are too early or not right or maybe even scams.
Right. So our mission here is to try and cut through that confusion. We want to look at the SSN's original purpose, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah, it really is.
And see how his use has just completely ballooned over the years. Understand the risks involved.
And basically arm you with the knowledge from these sources, help you protect yourself during that whole job search process.
Yeah, and we're going to lean on this specific California hiring checklist that one of you shared. It's got some really practical step-by-step advice.
It does. And what's fascinating right off the bat is just how far the SSN has drifted from what it was first designed for.
That's where it gets really interesting, doesn't it?
Yeah.
According to the SSA source material, the SSN was created way back, 1936.
Yeah.
And its sole purpose, it says here, tracking the earnings histories of U.S. workers. That was it, just for calculating Social Security benefits.
It's just an internal government bookkeeping thing for one program. Simple.
But look at it now. These sources, they describe a total transformation. Wikipedia calls it a de facto national identification number.
Used for way more than just benefits, yeah. And AARP, they go even further. They call it a passkey to Americans' financial lives.
A passkey? Wow. That sounds, a lot more powerful and, frankly, riskier than just tracking earnings for retirement.
It is. And sources like the PubMed one, they point out this expansion goes far beyond its original legal scope.
So it wasn't designed for this role.
Not at all. And the consensus we're seeing across these sources is pretty clear. This evolution, it's led directly to widespread misuse and identity theft. It just wasn't built with the kind of security needed for a universal ID.
Which brings us right into the job application world. I mean, if the SSN is this powerful, risky key, why do employers need it when you're just trying to get hired?
Yeah, and is it okay for them to ask for it, like on the first application form you fill out?
This is probably one of the most crucial points these sources really hammer home. Under federal law, and California law too, employers can only collect your SSN after they've made you a formal job offer.
After the offer. So not on that initial application form. That feels, different from what a lot of people might run into.
It might feel that way, sure, because its use is just so common now, but the law, as cited in these sources, is specific.
Okay.
And even after the offer, they can only collect it for specific lawful uses, things the government requires.
Like what specifically?
Well, the sources mention the IRS Form W-4, that's for federal tax withholding.
Right, taxes.
And the DHS Form I-9, which is for verifying you're eligible to work in the U.S.
Okay, taxes and eligibility. Makes sense.
But the I-9, importantly, that's completed on or after the first day of work, not necessarily right when the offer is made.
Okay. So taxes and proving you can legally work here. Those are the main legit reasons, but only after an offer is made. And the I-9 check is even a bit later.
Precisely. And the sources also mentioned that California law, specifically CA Civil Code Section 1798.85, puts requirements on employers to actually protect those SSNs once they do legally collect them.
Good. So they have a duty to keep it safe, too.
Okay, so that's the employer side of things, when they should ask and why. Now let's flip it. Let's look at it from your perspective, the applicant's side.
Yeah, using this California checklist as a kind of practical guide.
Right. If they can only ask after the offer, what exactly should you expect to receive, or maybe have confirmed, before you hand over something as sensitive as your SSN?
Well, that checklist source, it lays out a very clear core rule,
Yeah.
basically. Do not provide your Social Security number or your driver license number or bank info.
Okay.
UNL lists certain documents have been provided or key things confirmed first.
Okay. What are those certain documents? Because this feels like the spot where people get pressured or confused, right? They don't know what they're supposed to get first.
Absolutely. So according to this checklist, before you give that SSN for, say, onboarding paperwork, you should first receive a verbal or ideally a written offer of employment.
Not just a sort of, hey, we like you, maybe we'll hire you vibe, but an actual offer.
Yes, an actual offer, and one that includes key details. Things like the commission structure, if that applies, how often you'll be paid, the payment method, your confirmed start date.
And who your boss will be.
Right, your supervisor, if applicable. It's really about getting those fundamental job terms locked down first.
Okay, so a definite offer, clear terms.
Yeah.
What else needs to be in place before the SSN gets handed over?
Then, the sources emphasize getting the legally required documents, the ones that actually set up your employment, before you put your SSN on them.
Like what?
This includes the Wage Theft Prevention Notice. California Labor Con requires this. It outlines things like your pay rate, your official payday, employer info, that kind of stuff.
Right, so you know the basic terms of your employment in writing.
Exactly. And then you should receive the initial tax forms themselves, like the IRS Form W-4 for federal taxes and the C-8EE-4 form for California state taxes.
So you get the blank forms first.
Yes. You need the forms first, so you can then fill them out after you've accepted the job. And that's when you'd put your SSN on them.
Okay, that sequence makes sense. Get the offer, get the forms, then provide the SSN on the forms.
And remember, that I-9 form, the work eligibility one, that's filled out on or after day one. So that's even slightly later.
Got it. What about those pamphlets and notices mentioned?
Yeah, the state-mandated informational pamphlets, they're also listed as things you should receive beforehand.
What do they cover?
Crucial stuff, actually. Sexual harassment prevention info, paid family leave rights, disability insurance, and that time of hire pamphlet that explains general wage and hour rights.
These sound like documents about your rights and benefits. Why are they tied to when an employer can ask for your SSN?
It seems to be all part of the official compliant onboarding process. The idea is before you're sort of fully in the system and providing that core identifier like your SSN, you should have received all the fundamental legal info about job itself and your rights as an employee in that state.
Okay.
And if you happen to be a commission salesperson, the checklist source specifically flags this. You must get a written commission agreement. Labor Code Section 2751 requires it. And you need to understand how commissions are paid out before providing your info.
Wow, that California checklist source really does lay out a clear sequence. It even has space for you to track if you got the documents.
Yeah, it's designed to help you confirm you've got the facts and legal notices before you share that passkey, as AARP called it.
It kind of shifts the power dynamic a bit, doesn't it? Arms you with the knowledge of what's actually compliant.
Exactly. But here's the real danger zone, perhaps.
Yeah.
Despite these rules, the sources highlight that, unfortunately, many job applicants are, quote, routinely pressured to provide their SSN prematurely.
Why?
Sometimes, maybe, by hiring managers who honestly just don't fully understand the compliance laws themselves. It's complex.
Okay, so maybe ignorance sometimes. But
And then, yeah, perhaps even more concerning, you've got the outright scammers. The sources note explicitly that fake job offers and online job scams often function as SSN harvesting operations. They literally have no intention of ever hiring anyone.
How do those SSN harvesting scams usually play out? What should people look for?
Well, typically, they lure job seekers in with what look like legitimate interviews or job postings.
Yeah.
Often the communication is really fast, maybe online text messages.
Yeah.
Then, crucially, without ever providing a valid formal job offer or any of those legally required onboarding documents we just talked about.
Like the wage theft notice or the tax forms.
Right, or even proper business verification sometimes. They just jumped straight to asking for sensitive information, like copies of your ID documents and, of course, your social security number.
And that connects directly back to that huge risk of identity theft we mentioned right at the start.
Precisely. The sources are quite clear and honestly alarming about this. One source cites CNET saying employment identity theft is real and rising.
Wow.
And digital forensics is referenced, calling these job scams a gateway to financial and identity theft.
So they're not just wasting your time with a fake job lead. They're actively trying to steal your identity by getting that SSN under totally false pretenses.
That's the core danger highlighted here.
Okay, so given these risks and understanding the proper procedure now, what can someone actually do? Based on the advice in these sources, how do you protect yourself during the job search?
Well, first and foremost, based on source 2, just refuse. Refuse to provide your SSN before receiving formal documented job offers.
Just say no.
Essentially, yes, and be really alert to anyone asking for it too early. Treat that as a potential red flag for either a non-compliant employer or, worse, one of these fake SSN harvesting scams.
Okay. And if they do ask too early, or maybe they give you an offer but haven't provided those necessary documents yet, like the offer letter or the initial forms, what's the suggested response from that California checklist?
That checklist provides a really great legally sound line you can use. It suggests saying something like, California law requires certain disclosures before I provide identification or start work. I'd be happy to provide my info once I receive those.
Oh, I like that. It's polite. It points to the law, not just your preference, and it puts the responsibility back on them to follow the correct process before you give up your data.
Exactly. It frames it as a compliance issue for them, not just you being difficult.
And what else? Any other practical tips from the sources?
Yeah. Crucial advice from that same checklist source. Keep records of all your communication, texts, emails, messages, especially if you feel something is off or if you are feeling pressured. Documentation is key.
Makes sense. But what if they keep pushing, even after you use that polite line about needing the documents first?
Well, the checklist source is pretty blunt here. It says, if pressured, you should walk away.
Walk away. That feels incredibly hard, especially if you really need a job and you've already invested time in interviews and stuff.
It absolutely is hard, no question. But the sources really emphasize the severity of the risk here.
The risk of identity theft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The potential fallout from giving your SSN to a scammer or even just a really non-compliant company, it can be significant and last a long time. The checklist kind of implies that a legitimate employer who knows and follows the law won't pressure you like that.
So excessive pressure itself is a major red flag.
That's the takeaway. And the sources also note you should report non-compliance if you encounter it. They specifically mention state labor agencies and the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC.
Okay. This really does highlight how the SSN's journey, from that simple tracker number to this universal key, has created these bigger systemic problems. It's not just about individual job seekers trying to stay safe.
It certainly has. And drawing on the sort of reform section in one of the sources, the SSN's current widespread use banks, jobs, courts, healthcare, everything. It makes it this universal key to identity.
Which, as we said, makes it a prime target for criminals.
Exactly. And also, kind of ironically, a compliance trap for employers who might not be fully up to speed on all these specific rules about when and how they can ask for it.
It really sounds like just relying on this single, relatively insecure number for so many critical functions is maybe the root problem itself.
That's what some of the policy discussions mentioned in the source seem to target. Ideas like maybe mandating restrictions on SSN use, pushing it back towards its original purpose, just taxes and benefits.
Interesting. What else?
Things like requiring explicit employee consent for using it in background screening or ID requests beyond those legally mandated forms we discussed.
So more control for the individual.
Potentially. And also developing clear, maybe national guidelines for how employers must securely store and handle SSNs. Basically, systemic ideas trying to fix the underlying vulnerability.
Okay, so to try and bring this all together then, the key takeaway from digging into these sources seems to be, while the SSN started out simple, its expanded role, particularly in the hiring process, has created these real significant risks. Identity theft, scams. It's serious.
Definitely. And knowing the legal requirements, really understanding what an employer must provide you, like that formal offer, specific legal documents before you share sensitive info like your SSN, that knowledge is your most powerful defense based on this material.
It puts the power back in your hands, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Armed with the facts, like from these sources, and that very practical California checklist.
It does.
So here's maybe something to think about after listening to all this. A final thought based on the material. Given that the SSN was never, ever intended to be a national ID, but now it pretty much functions as one, creating these vulnerabilities for basically everyone, what responsibility truly falls on us as individuals to navigate this risk, especially during something as common as looking for a job, versus the responsibility that falls on institutions, on the system itself, to fix this fundamental exposure?
That's a heavy question. And of course, as the sources themselves note, just remember this deep dive is for educational purposes based on the material we had, and it's definitely not legal advice.
Absolutely.
Well-
Always consult professionals for specific situations.